We usually have data and we need to get the totals. We need to get a total of our annual purchases, our total expenses. Doing that manually, it's a little bit complicated when it comes to many data. So the sum function helps us to do that. In this video, we're going to be talking about the sum function, the sum if, and the sum ifs, like sum if with s. So if we want to add a range of cells, we use the sum function, which is this, without any other thing, just sum. So for example, we want to get the total annual purchases. This is an annual purchase report. We have a customer ID, we have a gender, we have a city, education, annual purchase, annual salary. Don't bother about this. It's this cell. It's about just selecting this model. I think we didn't see this before. We could just look for a way to place it, to position it. It's no big deal. So we come to this cell, this where we want to sum or to give the total of all the annual purchases. So simply I'm going to take sum. You see the description says add all the numbers in the range of cells. So I'll choose this. I use the tab key to choose it since it was already highlighted, or I open bracket directly and I select from this to this, meaning from the first range, from this first cell to the last cell, and I press enter. So you see this was just very easy. It just summed everything for me. What if we want to sum only customers who made purchases in New York? It becomes much more complicated. Only in Chicago, only in Seattle. So in this case, we'll have to sum with a condition. If we want to solve with a condition, we will use the sum if. If is a condition, sum adds. So we're going to sum here, taking into consideration that from our database, we want to sum annual purchases only for those customers in New York. So we say equals to, we put sum if. I use my tab key to select. Before that, let's look at the description. Add the cells specified by a given condition or criteria. So we have the first argument, which is the range. The second one is criteria, and the third one is sum range. The range here represents the set of value we want to take into consideration to sum. So here the range is going to be the cities. We want to sum by taking into consideration cities. Then the criteria. Before we go to criteria, they ask us to put semicolon. If in your machine it is comma, please put the comma. So after putting the semicolon and I'm at the level of the criteria, so what do I actually want to sum? In this range, I want to sum uniquely New York. So I click on New York. The next part or the next argument represents the sum range. Okay, in this range or in all the cities, I want to sum New York, but what do I actually want to sum? I want to sum the annual purchases. So I close bracket and I press enter. You realize that this will sum uniquely those annual purchases made in New York. This can work only if the New York written here is exactly the same way it has been written in this other cells. If, for example, I spell this New York not correctly or not the same way, if, for example, there is no space here, you will see it won't sum anything because it can't see this New York in this range of cells. But if I adjust it exactly the same way, it's going to sum. If I choose or to verify this, I will select all the annual purchases in New York at the same time. To select multiple cells at the same time in the different cells, you use the control, you hold control. So I will hold control, select the second one, hold control, select this other one, or annual purchase with New York, annual purchase with New York, annual purchase with New York. And you can see down here, the sum is correct, 17,733. So this is very correct. So I can just drag this down, and for me to drag this down, I'll have to make my cell reference to be absolute. See, if I drag this down, it will not give me a good result, because as I went down, the references or the cells moved from C 4 to C to D or to E14. All this is not really correct, because should in case there's Chicago in C3, it won't take it into consideration. Same as in this other cell, as we went 2 steps below, the cell reference equally went 2 steps below, and it is no more taking into consideration the area we want to make our calculation or the criteria. So I'll come on this very first formula. I want the cities and the annual purchases to be absolute, meaning it should not change. Only the city of criteria should change, like from A17 to A18 to A19, but this range should not change. Like we saw in the previous video, to make this constant, we use the absolute function by putting $sign in front of the column we want to stabilize. So here I'm just going to put the $sign both in front and behind of the letter. I come here, I put $sign in front and behind. We said we do that by pressing the F4 key. I'll do same here, but A17 I won't put the $sign because I don't want it to be constant. So when I drag this down and I check on this formula, it's pretty better because the cell reference has not actually gone down. Now let's get to the second one. This was the sum if without s. Should in case we want to sum the cities, take it into consideration the gender. In this case, you see we are going to put numerous conditions. The first condition is that we should sum annual purchases. No, here we're talking about annual salaries, sorry. Here we want to sum annual salaries, meaning these annual salaries for people who live in New York and are men, people who live in New York and are female, those in Chicago who are men, those in Chicago who are female. You see, it brings a lot of conditions in summing. That is why here we will use the sum ifs, because sum ifs helps us to sum with many criteria. Meanwhile, sum if sums with just one criteria. So yeah, I'm going to put equal to sum if with s. I'm using the arrow on my key to drop it to sum if. They say at the cell specified by a given set of conditions or criteria. So our open bracket will be asked as argument the sum range. Where or which range of values do I want to sum? These are the range of values I want to sum. They ask for a semicolon. After that, they are asking for the first criteria range. The first criteria range I'm going to take into consideration the cities. So, like the word implies criteria range. This is the criteria range. I'll take an advantage and just put it to be absolute or true. So the criteria in this criteria range is New York. So after putting the semicolon, I click on New York. So in this criteria range, I want this criteria. I want to sum uniquely New York. Now, it's not all. I equally want to look into the gender. So you will see criteria range 2. This was criteria range 1 now. Criteria range 2. I want to take into consideration the gender. And the criteria for this gender is male for this cell. So if there are more conditions, you see criteria 3 and so on. I can put as many conditions as possible. Just that here we have just 2 criteria to take into consideration. So I close this and I press enter. So it's going to sum those who made annual purchases in New York and are male. If I drag this down, it will do same for female. But you realize that it has moved the cells or the cell references from annual salary to something else, because I did not make these cells to be absolute, but cities, can you remember? I made these to be absolute. So I can come back here and I'll make the criteria range for annual salaries. This range, I'll make it completely absolute. Then pressing F4, I'm equally going to make the gender, which is this, to be absolute. So I've corrected this. If I drag it this way, normally I'm supposed to have a good reply, but it's not given. Okay, it's because the New York has equally moved from D18 to D19, so I'll just change this from E to D. I'll bring it back to D. So you can see it has summed all the female who live in New York and has an annual salary. We could equally do same for Chicago. So we'll do it again from scratch. We'll say Sumif with S. We want to sum the annual salary. If the first criteria should be the city, and the next criteria or the criteria range should be Chicago. The next criteria is the gender, and it should be a male. So from here, I close bracket and I press enter, and it will sum uniquely those who are in Chicago and they are males. Basically, this is how we manipulate the sum function, the sum if function, and the sum ifs function. So in resume, sum just gives a total with no criteria, no condition. Sum if gives total with one condition, and the sum ifs give totals with more than one condition. Thank you for watching this video. We get to something better in the next video.